December 7, 1941. The day began with a phone call. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, his voice excited, informed Secretary of War William Stimson that the Japanese had attacked Hawaii. The surprise was profound. At Pearl Harbor, 8 battleships were sunk or crippled, 2 cruisers, 4 destroyers. The iconic image of battleships wedged against each other in their concrete moorings, like broken toys jammed in a drain, would haunt a generation. For many, the underground fuel facility, serving as a mass grave, became a chilling symbol. Just months prior, the Army's victory plan had outlined America's strategic priorities: focus first on the Atlantic theater, deferring full engagement with Japan until 1943. This initial strategic posture represented a profound underestimation of Japan's immediate capabilities and intentions. But the attack shattered American isolationism and irrevocably plunged the nation into a global conflict. Pre-war strategic timelines were instantly invalidated. The very next day, in response, President Roosevelt announced seemingly impossible production quotas: 60,000 warplanes for 1942, 125,000 for 1943, an additional 8 million tons of merchant shipping. These targets were a deliberate tactic to extract maximum industrial effort, signaling an unwavering commitment to total war. The transition, however, was far from seamless. The pre-war period had been marked by resistance to a centralized war production authority. The Office of Production Management, or OPM, faced significant bureaucratic inertia and political infighting. New dealers clashed with private industry representatives. Knudsen, the OPM director, tasked with accelerating production, found himself caught in this crossfire. He faced constant criticism. His airplane expert, Merrill Church, Babe Meigs, an ex-publisher and passionate aviator, warned Knudsen of political enemies and impending smear campaigns. The CIO chief, Philip Murray, criticized OPM for being infested with wealthy men, referring to the $1 a year executives who had volunteered their services. Even as the nation faced existential threat, a railway strike loomed on December 7th, and a consolidated plant strike erupted just 9 days later. On January 15, 1942, Leon Henderson, head of the Office of Price Administration, ordered the abrupt halt of all civilian auto production. While a bold step, it created immediate economic chaos and worker displacement, unfairly amplifying criticism of Knudsen. The next day, January 16th, Knudsen was effectively dismissed. He sat disconsolately picking out a tune at the piano, a torn piece of news ticker paper, announcing his fate. His removal, however, coincided with a critical turning point: the formation of the War Production Board, the WPB, consolidating OPM, and its predecessor, SPAB, under Donald Nelson, represented a decisive shift towards a more unified and empowered war production agency. Knudsen, though ousted from Washington, was reassigned as a 3-star general in charge of production liaison for the War Department. This move underscored the critical need for his expertise on the factory floor rather than mired in Washington bureaucracy. Despite the initial friction, America's response was prodigious. The war spurred an unparalleled surge in industrial output, vastly exceeding initial projections. In 1941 alone, Knudsen's efforts had overseen the production of 19,290 planes, 50,684 aircraft engines, 97,000 machine guns, and nearly 4,000 tanks. Roosevelt's ambitious quotas, initially viewed as propaganda, became a catalyst for re-evaluating and ultimately exceeding industrial capabilities. For decades, historical accounts sometimes oversimplified the early mobilization, suggesting American industry was inheritance. However, newly examined records reveal that while bureaucratic hurdles existed, the shock of Pearl Harbor unleashed a surge of initiative, driven by individuals like Knudsen and the inherent flexibility of American manufacturing. The ultimate imperative of war production eventually overcame internal struggles, particularly with strong leadership at critical junctures. By comparison, Germany, under Albert Speer, would later attempt to replicate American mass production principles. Speer eventually achieved a nearly 50% surge in German production by 1944. But the American model, built around free enterprise and an agile, decentralized industrial base, proved more adaptable and ultimately more productive. It quickly outpaced even Germany's more centrally controlled economy. The rapid transition from a peacetime economy to a war production powerhouse fundamentally altered the global balance of power. It reversed the economic downturn, creating full employment in key industrial centers like Detroit, whose employment would more than double by D-Day. This unprecedented mobilization, fueled by 25,000 prime contractors and 120,000 subcontractors, would lay the foundation for Allied victory. As the nation mobilized, the strategic importance of Pacific outposts like Wake Island became acutely clear. This 600-acre strip of sand and coral, located 1,200 miles southwest of Midway and halfway from Hawaii to Manila, was critical for resupplying the Philippines and monitoring Japanese movements. Its rapid fortification and construction had become a desperate necessity. In October 1940, the first shipments of cement began arriving at Pearl Harbor, destined for these vital Pacific projects. Henry Kaiser, the industrialist who epitomized ambition, had proposed shipping cement in bulk. Initially met with Navy skepticism, this innovation offered significant cost and time savings. Hours after the attack on Pearl Harbor, on December 8th of Chak, on December 8th of there, 1941, Japanese bombers attacked Wake Island. Marine Commander Major James Devereux led his depleted forces against overwhelming Japanese assaults. Alongside the Marines, MK engineer Dan Teeters mobilized construction workers for defense. They fought with hastily constructed defenses, using 5-inch guns reinforced with Kaiser's bulk cement, which proved surprisingly effective against Japanese landing craft. 12 Grumman Wildcats, the island's only fighter aircraft, were reduced to 4 by relentless attacks, yet they were kept operational through cannibalized parts and improvised repairs, even utilizing truck and bulldozer engine components. On December 11, 1941, the first Japanese warships appeared off Wake Island, leading to intense fighting. By December 22, the last Marine Wildcat fighter was lost. On December 23, Japanese forces launched a final, overwhelming assault, forcing a surrender. The desperate measures and immense sacrifices made by construction workers alongside Marines served as a potent symbol of American resistance, galvanizing national morale. This experience directly contributed to the formation of the construction battalions, the CBs, formalizing the integration of civilian construction expertise into military operations. However, the war at sea was exacting a brutal toll. In the first half of 1942 alone, over 6.4 million tons of Allied merchant shipping were lost, particularly due to German U-boat tactics. This catastrophe created an urgent and overwhelming demand for increased shipbuilding capacity. American and British leadership had initially underestimated the scale of these needs. Successive, increasingly ambitious production goals were set, moving from millions of tons to tens of millions. In February 1942, Admiral Land, head of the Maritime Commission, reported to Congress losses of 7 to 12 ships, nearly 150,000 tons, in 1941 due to strikes and other issues, losses comparable to those from U-boat attacks. On February 1932, President Roosevelt informed Admiral Land of drastically increased shipbuilding requirements. Goals for 1942 and 1943, initially set at 5 and 7 million tons respectively, were quickly escalated to 8 and 10 million, then finally to 9 and 15 million tons. This necessitated a fundamental reshaping of industrial priorities. Admiral Howard Vickery, the Maritime Commission's head of construction, drove the ambitious expansion goals. Steve Bechtel, partner in the 6 companies responsible for construction on Guam and Cavite, rapidly established the Marin shipyard. On March 3rd, On March 3rd, 1942, Vickery sent telegrams to shipbuilding contractors regarding new yard proposals. Construction began on the Marin shipyard just 25 days later, on March 28th. Henry Kaiser's Richmond yards saw their employment swell from 4,000 in the summer of 1941 to 80,000 by the end of 1942, and 100,000 a year later. The construction of Edgar Kaiser's first ship, the Star of Oregon, had taken 253 days between May 1941 and New Year's Eve. But the immense pressure to meet escalating demands led to revolutionary changes. By January and February 1942, the Meriwether Lewis and William Clark were launched, showing significantly reduced assembly times. In March 1942, the Robert Fulton, the 10th ship, launched, was completed in just 154 days. The standard Liberty ship engine, an EC2, was a 135-ton reciprocating engine with only 2,500 horsepower. While a relic of an earlier era, it could be built quickly by various companies, making it eminently suitable for mass production. The establishment of the Joint Aircraft Committee marked a critical shift towards standardization in aviation production, paving the way for mass production and improved logistical support for 55 different types of aircraft. This immense surge in shipbuilding and overall war production, fueled by figures like Kaiser and Knutson, allowed America to not only defend itself, but also project power across two oceans, ultimately equaling the Axis powers' combined production. The ongoing U-boat threat and the sheer scale of shipping losses underscored the need for even greater efficiency in shipbuilding. Early 1942 reports from Admiral Land had highlighted the crippling impact of strikes and inefficiencies, costing nearly 150,000 tons of shipping in 1941 alone, the Richmond Yard another 100 cents. One, for instance, ranked 33rd out of 41 shipyards in employee attendance. Traditional shipbuilding methods, characterized by a chaotic swarming of workers in the final stages, were creating critical bottlenecks. At Kaiser's Richmond Yard, Num. 2, Clay Bedford, a true pioneer, revolutionized the process. He implemented prefabrication techniques, moving the construction of deckhouses and other major ship sections off-site. His design for a massive prefabrication shop, a 480-foot-long steel frame shed with 3 bridge cranes in each of 2 90-foot bays, allowed for the assembly of colossal units, deckhouse steel slabs, averaging 20 feet long and weighing up to 72 tons, were moved with specialized trailers. Engine room prefabrication involved assembling over 100 sections of piping before they reached the ship. A 3-foot-high concrete platform with trolley wheels served as a conveyor belt system, facilitating sequential assembly. Initially, deck construction required 36 separate steel plates. Bedford's methods reduced this to just 7 pre-assemblies. By August 1942, Bedford's prefab yard employed 2,500 workers, including 42 women welders and burners. This radical shift from craft-based construction to assembly line techniques dramatically reduced build times. The Henry W. Longfellow, launched in April 1942, took 86 days. The James Whitcomb Riley, launched in May 1942, took 73 days. By July, the Thomas Bailey Aldrich was completed in just 43 days. In August, Yard Nana 2 launched a ship in 24 days. The competitive drive between Kaiser's Portland yards, led by Edgar Kaiser, and Bedford's Richmond efforts, pushed production even further. President Roosevelt, witnessing this unprecedented acceleration, personally visited the Kaiser yards. His presence validated and amplified the success of the new methods. In September 1942, the Joseph Teal was launched in a mere 10 days, with President Roosevelt attending its christening. The apex of this competitive spirit came on November 7, 1942, when the keel was laid for hull number 440, dubbed the 5-day ship. Just 4 days, 15 hours and 26 minutes later, on November 12, 1942, the Robert E. Peary was launched. This rapid build was not merely a publicity stunt. The Robert E. Peary would log over 42,000 miles, set a cargo loading record of 10,500 tons in under 35 hours by May 1943, and would finally be retired for the Breakers Yard in June 1963. In November 1942 alone, Richmond Yards, NOS 1 and 2, launched 18 Liberty ships, an average of 1 every other day. Donald Nelson, the head of the War Production Board, has often been portrayed as an ineffectual figure. However, a closer look reveals his quiet effectiveness in enabling industry, rather than attempting to control it. His approach, influenced by his predecessor Knudsen, was to maximize output and efficiency, even when facing criticism, as from Assistant Attorney General Thurman Arnold over antitrust concerns. The war effort demonstrated that a powerful surge in production could be achieved through collaboration and innovation, not solely through heavy-handed government control. By 1942, the American economy was fully pivoting to war production, marking the transition from planning to mass output. The numbers were staggering. Tank production surged from 3,964 in 1941 to 24,754 in 1942. Small arms production leapt from 617,000 to 2.3 million. Machine guns increased from 97,000 to 663,000. Heavy bombers, the B-17s and B-24s, rose from 318 to 2,618. In total, nearly 50,000 aircraft were produced in 1942, exceeding Roosevelt's initial, impossible target. By the end of that year, USA war materiel production exceeded that of Germany, Italy, and Japan combined. This unprecedented output was achieved not just through brute force, but through a pragmatic bending of traditional economic and bureaucratic rules. The urgent need for war material forced the government to prioritize production over standard antitrust regulations. President Roosevelt, on September 18, 1942, issued an executive order suspending antitrust prosecution for companies critical to defense. This move, reinforced by the influx of Republicans who sided with the administration against trustbusters in the midterm elections of 1942, decisively shifted national priorities. The perceived inflexibility of government bureaucracy and traditional economic models necessitated reliance on dollar-a-year men from industry. While the Truman Committee, chaired by Senator Harry Truman, pushed for reforms to address potential conflicts of interest, Donald Nelson, director of the War Production Board, defended their necessity. He argued that individuals like Bill Batt, whose former company was a major ball-bearing producer, or Charles Wilson of General Electric, were essential for their industry-specific knowledge. Bureaucratic absurdity, however, could still abound, as evidenced by the New York Bank vice president who was hired for a government role, then rejected for the same position he already held. The steel shortage, a critical bottleneck, threatened to halt the entire war production effort. By January 1, 1942, there was a 4.5 million-ton backlog in unfilled orders. Henry Kaiser, the indefatigable industrialist, stepped into this breach. On April 21, 1941, he had presented plans to Roosevelt for a steel production complex, despite significant logistical challenges, including the need for 160,000 gallons of water per ton of steel. Kaiser pushed forward. His proposed Fontana steel plant, located near the junction of three major railroads in Southern California, was strategically vital. With Bill Knudson's quiet support after his reassignment in mid-February 1942, WPB approval was secured. Jesse Jones, head of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, provided crucial financing, finalizing a loan deal on March 19, 1942. Ground was broken for the Fontana mill by the end of April. In tank production, Chrysler's KT, Keller and Eddie Hunt were instrumental. They mass-produced the M3 Grant and M4 Sherman tanks, even designing a multi-bank engine-5 standard car engines linked together to power the Sherman. While controversial for ammunition space, it was praised by British forces. At Fisher-Body's tank arsenal, Bud Goodman, a young production miracle worker, utilized new welding processes that saved 4/5 of machining time and a 480-ton metal press for shaping Sherman tank hulls. 30-ton jigs lifted and rotated the tanks for final assembly. On July 22, 1942, the first Chrysler production Sherman rolled off the line. Roosevelt visited Chrysler's tank arsenal on September 18, 1942, just weeks after it earned its first Army-Navy E pennant. The critical need for specific war materiel also spurred innovation within individual companies. Andrew Jackson Higgins, inventor and builder of the Higgins boat, the LCVP, had initially struggled for Navy adoption. His Eureka boat was designed for shallow water operation, requiring only 1 inch of depth, and featured a crucial front ramp for beach landings. The Pearl Harbor attack, however, served as a potent catalyst for increased demand. By March 1942, Higgins was employing over 3,000 workers for landing craft and PT boat orders. Roosevelt, on September 29, 1942, again demonstrated his support by visiting Higgins Industries. Higgins Industries would eventually design 92% of all vessels used by the U.S. Navy in World War II, and in July 1943 alone, built more landing craft than all other USA factories combined. The war effort also led to a massive increase in the employment of women. From 80,000 6 months after Pearl Harbor, their numbers swelled to 3 million by the end of 1942. This transformed the workforce and contributed significantly to America's overplace. Aluminum production, under Alcoa's Arthur Bunker, Nelson's $a-year man, rocketed from £327 million per year in 1939 to £2.25 billion per year by October 1943. Synthetic rubber production, predicted to reach 800,000 tons by 1944, actually approached 1.4 million tons. Even silver was used for electrical wiring during a severe copper shortage, and brass for ammunition shells, demonstrating the remarkable adaptability of American industry. The automotive industry's conversion was central to this surge. On February 10, 1942, the last civilian production car, a Ford V8, rolled off the assembly line at the Ford River Rouge plant. The plant immediately shifted to producing staff cars, Navy service trucks, bomb service trucks, and Jeeps. Bill Knudsen, instrumental in establishing the Automotive Council for War Production, had called for aircraft parts production even before this official cutoff. Ernest Kanzler, overseeing this conversion, dubbed it a miracle. The Fontana steel plant, despite its remote location and significant challenges, including the need for a smokestack scrubbing device, the most advanced anti-pollution technology in the country at the time, Republic Steel's Tom Girdler provided essential engineering drawings. On December 30, 1942, the main blast furnace, named Bess after Henry Kaiser's wife, had its blow-in, with 90 coke ovens, a 200-ton blast furnace and 6 185-ton blast furnace and 6. Fontana would produce 472,000 tons of steel plate annually, nearly 10% of America's capacity shortfall. It cost less than half and finished 5 months ahead of the government's more expensive and slower Geneva, Utah plant. This demonstrated that innovation and efficient management could outperform brute force government investment. The Automotive Council for War Production served as a blueprint for industry collaboration. Howday Hershey simplified .30 caliber machine gun manufacturing, replacing an aluminum handle with a sturdier substitute. Saginaw steering gears engineer Bud Doerfner innovated by creating round holes for .50 caliber machine gun barrels, enabling 10 holes to be drilled per operation instead of 1. By March 1942, Saginaw delivered 28,728 machine guns, far exceeding an initial promise of 2,000. General Motors' war production startup began just 29 days after ending civilian lines, eventually contributing 10% of all U.S. of ending civilian war production. Army vehicle production, at 15,000 in 1939, soared to 800,000 by the end of 1942 and 3.2 million by 1945. U.S. automakers ultimately produced 50% of aircraft engines, 35% of aircraft propellers, 47% of aerial bombs, 87% of aerial bombs, 80% of U.S. craft, and 100% of U.S. turrecraft, and 100% of U.S. Army trucks. Among these achievements, Charles Sorensen, known as Cast Iron Charlie, embarked on perhaps the most ambitious project, the mass production of the B-24 bomber. He insisted Ford would build the entire B-24, not just parts, a vision he presented to Reuben Fleet of Consolidated Aircraft. Fleet was overwhelmed. Automobiles contained around 15,000 parts. A B-24 had almost 500,000, with 300,000 rivets in 500 sizes. Consolidated's goal was 350 B-24s a year. Sorensen projected a bomber an hour, potentially 300 per day if 12 plants were operational. Consolidated had its own innovations. David Davis's teardrop wing design achieved 102% efficiency, and the wet wing fuel tank, sprayed with Duprenais sealer, was a marvel. Yet, pilots described the B-24 as tricky to handle, a son of a gun, requiring constant adjustment. Ford's production, however, would constitute 36.6% of B-24s in 1944. They cut the cost per unit from $25,000 to $10,000. They also mass-produced gliders, CG-4As, cutting their unit cost by more than half. The ingenuity and proactivity of industry leaders and workers, not merely government dictate, drove this unprecedented industrial transformation. This unwavering insistence that Ford would build the complete plane or nothing set the stage for an unprecedented industrial transformation. Willow Run. On February 25, 1941, Charlie Sorensen secured his contract with Washington, officially greenlighting Ford's entry into airplane manufacturing. Dr. Charlie D. Alighting Manufacturing, Meade approved the initial funding. Bulldozers began transforming Willow Run from tranquil farmland into a factory site on March 28, 1941. Ground was broken on April 18, 1941, for what would become the world's largest factory. Designed by Albert Kahn, the Willow Run factory would eventually grow to 4.7 million square feet, covering 80 acres with an 850-acre airfield. Sorensen projected a workforce of 60,000, with some estimates reaching 100,000. His ambition was for 100 knockdown versions of the B-24 per month by May 1942, and the first finished Ford bombers by September 1942. The factory's design, wide enough to allow an aisle between machines and the assembly line you could drive a car through, vividly illustrated the intended scale and efficiency. However, the core conflict arose from applying the principles of car assembly-standardized parts, predictable processes, to aircraft. The B-24, with its 488,093 separate parts, was vastly more complex. Consolidated, the original B-24 designer often lacked complete blueprints, largely made them up as they went along. This ad hoc engineering approach, combined with the Army Air Force's continuous design modifications based on battlefield feedback, created a moving target for Ford's mass production system. Ford's reliance on steel dies clashed with the aircraft industry's use of softer metal alloys, revealing differing approaches to precision and durability. On April 7, 1942, Charles Lindbergh, then a consultant, visited Willow Run. He noted only 9,000 workers were present against an estimated need of 60,000. He described Willow Run as a sort of Grand Canyon of the mechanized world, capturing its overwhelming scale and partial completion. The sheer scale of the plant necessitated enormous infrastructure housing, transportation that proved far more difficult to secure and manage than initially anticipated. Leadership struggles and personal conflicts further hampered progress. A fistfight between Sorensen and Bennett epitomized the managerial chaos. Edsel Ford, who initially endorsed the project, had connected Sorensen with Consolidated, but Sorensen's own admission, "But, Mr. Stensier Prize, Sorensen, I don't know a thing about airplanes," followed by his retort, "Who the hell does over there?" revealed a significant gap in aviation expertise within Ford's leadership. By July 27, 1942, Lieutenant General Bill Knudsen, Roosevelt's wartime production troubleshooter, visited Willow Run. His wry observation, "We're short on everything except bottlenecks," summed up the pervasive issues. He proposed build the airplanes first and add whatever improvements are necessary at some place especially equipped to do that. This field modification solution became a standard practice, acknowledging the dynamic nature of wartime technology and the necessity of integrating battlefield learning into production. The Willow Run project, while eventually producing a significant number of B-24s, served as a critical, albeit costly, lesson in the unique challenges of aircraft manufacturing. It exposed the limits of mass production when applied to a product requiring constant design evolution and specialized engineering. From a symbol of progress, Willow Run became, for a time, an object of public ridicule and scrutiny, a public relations nightmare. Its immense difficulties, however, ultimately helped develop new paradigms for managing complex wartime production. The ongoing struggles at Willow Run, combined with the persistent U-boat threat, underscored the need for both more reliable aircraft production and effective deployment strategies. The B-24's initial faults, tough handling, less than rugged airframe were slowly overshadowed by its virtues. A long 850-mile range, the ability to carry a bigger load than the Flying Fortress, and its adaptability. 1942, the first completed Ford B-24 emerged, following the precedent set by Doolittle's Raiders in April 1942, whose B-25s had been successfully modified by Mid-Continental Airlines. By the fall of 1942, Willow Run's operations became unified, moving from finished planes and subassemblies to a single coherent bomber production line. Production numbers began to steadily climb, from 56 bombers by the end of 1942 to 104 in March 1943, reaching 300 per month by October 1943. By early 1944, Willow Run achieved Sorensen's vision of 500 bombers a month, prompting Charlie Wilson to send a congratulatory telegram to Sorensen on March 3, 1944. A crucial adaptation was the VLR Liberator, a B-24D Mark III model modified with extra fuel tanks in one of its 3 bomb bays, carrying almost 3,000 gallons of fuel. This effectively doubled its maritime patrol range. Its bomb bay doors, designed to slide open and shut in a swift 3 seconds, contrasted with the slower swinging doors of the Flying Fortress, reducing vulnerability. The VLR Liberator played a decisive role in the Battle of the Atlantic. In March and April 1943, its impact began. Admiral Karl Donitz, Commander-in-Chief of the German Navy, initially saw his U-boat wolf packs achieve devastating success, sinking 97 Allied merchant ships in the first 20 days of March. But in the last 10 days of March, only 1 ship was lost. British Coastal Command began shuttle patrols from Gander to Reykjavik in April 1943. On May 4, 1943, convoy ONS-5 came under concentrated attack, a decisive turning point where Allied counterattacks sank 6 submarines. By May 24, 1943, Admiral Donitz acknowledged Germany's loss of the U-boat war, calling off his wolf packs. Admiralty analysts calculated each VLR patrol saved no less than 6 Allied ships. VLR squadrons were credited with no fewer than 72 U-boat kills. Tragically, Donitz's own younger son was lost in action. Despite these victories, the industrial effort was a bitter, exhausting journey. Labor disputes persisted. Strikes broke out in Pittsburgh area coal fields on April 28, 1943. Over 60,000 coal miners went on strike again on June 19, 1943. A threatened railroad strike on December 27, 1943, forced army seizure. In 1943 alone, work stoppages cost 13.5 million man-days. Henry Ford II was even released from active duty to help save the situation at Ford plants amidst labor strife. However, labor troubles eased in 1944, with 8.7 million man-days lost. By 1943, American production had become a torrent of material. Liberty ships reached 116,434 Navy vessels, 16,000 landing craft, 9,616 heavy bombers, 29,495 tanks, 7 million small arms, 800,000 tons of artillery shells, and 830,000 machine guns rolled off assembly lines. In total, 85,946 airplanes of all kinds were produced. American war production was now twice that of Germany and Japan combined. Donald Nelson, facing efforts to centralize production control, successfully argued that the system devised by Knudsen, leaving production largely in the hands of business, should remain due to its demonstrated success. This challenged the myth that only large, centrally controlled government operations could achieve such output. Large corporations, like General Electric with 30 million square feet of production space in 34 main plants, produced propulsion plants for warships, turbo superchargers, searchlights, radios, radar sets, and motors for landing craft ramps. General Motors, with 41 operating divisions, saw war product sales of $3.50 billion in 1943 alone, building 10% of everything America produced. GM's Eastern Aircraft learned from Ford's mistakes, focusing on subassemblies to produce Avengers and Wildcats. Their overseas operations developed temporary plants for assembling trucks near front lines, including one in Iran at Andimesh. But it was not just the giants. The text reveals the crucial role of small and medium-sized businesses. Bill Knudsen aimed to make them the lifeblood of defense contracting. Clyde Walling's company operated out of a 2-car garage, with exactly 3 men. Ma and Pa Harrington made $1,000 worth of machine tools a month in their living room, using a Junt lathe and old washing machine motor, and an oil pump salvaged from a 1926 Chevrolet. Organized housewives and office clerks to make 500,000 cells a day for walkie-talkie batteries. Even Manitowoc Shipbuilding, using Fairbanks Morse diesel engines and pontoon docks for transport, launched 28 Navy submarines in less than 2 years. This network of diverse businesses, from giant corporations to home-based operations, was vital to the arsenal of democracy. The American wartime production miracle was not solely a product of government decree or altruism. It was a powerful, if often messy, synthesis of free market capitalist incentives, individual ingenuity, and a vast, decentralized network of American businesses and workers, adapting to unprecedented demands. Lieutenant General Knudsen, a primary architect of this system, championed a voluntary, profit-driven model. He saw the generosity of selfishness as a powerful motivator, believing individuals and businesses would contribute their skills and resources if there was personal advantage to be gained. Knudsen's early 1942 inspection trips highlighted existing industrial capacity and identified opportunities for conversion and innovation. Businessweek ran stories in the spring of 1941 on securing defense contracts and conversion. The government, while able to prohibit civilian production, largely left companies to their own imagination and market opportunities for what to produce. This flexibility allowed for rapid innovation. Plastic parts, for instance, replaced metal in trench mortar fuses, addressing critical material shortages. Frank Hobbs and George Comstock developed lightweight plywood Pacific huts in the spring of 1942, a direct improvement over heavy steel Quonset huts, saving critical wartime materials. By September 1943, Hobbs's company boasted of being 2 months ahead of schedule. Ted Nelson invented the rocket gun for rapid welding of studs on naval vessels, increasing output from 40 per hour to an astounding 1,000 per hour. The war also triggered immense demographic and social transformations. Over 20 million Americans left their homes for war work, with 15.3 million living in new locations post-war. At least 7 million people left farms, with 5.5 million relocating to factories and cities. Farm payrolls fell by only 1 million, yet productivity increased. Nearly 1 million African Americans left the South for points north and west, with another 500,000 joining the military. The widespread adoption of women into industrial roles began in early 1941. The first 25 women entered the Consolidated Vultee plant for electrical subassembly work on March 31, 1941. By July 1944, 36% of all workers in prime defense contractors were female, reaching nearly 5 million by war's end. At General Motors, women comprised 30.7% of hourly wage earners by the end of 1943. In Kaiser's Richmond yards, women comprised 70% of the workforce. Marilyn Monroe, then Norma Jean Ducati, worked as a parachute stuffer, becoming an Army newsreel model before her Hollywood fame. Writer Augusta Clawson worked as a welder, documenting the grueling but empowering experience of women in shipyard work in The Shipyard Diary of a Woman Welder, published in 1944. However, the war also highlighted and exacerbated racial and social tensions. Philip Randolph, head of the Railway Porters Union, threatened a mass march on Washington on May 29, 1941, to ensure employment and military integration for African Americans. Under this pressure, President Roosevelt issued Executive Order 8802 on June 25, 1941, banning employment discrimination in defense industries. While an imperfect but significant step, deep-seated racial inequalities persisted. Catherine Archibald, a sociologist, observed the intense racial and gender tensions within shipyards, contrasting sharply with the idealized image of wartime unity. The Detroit race riot of June 1943, which saw 34 people die, 25 black and 9 white, underscored the fragility of this national cohesion. Yet, this complex and often messy process ultimately fueled an unprecedented production volume and quality, transforming American society and securing Allied victory. Henry Kaiser, often described as the man of mystery by Businessweek in March 1941, and celebrated by Life, Time, and Fortune as terrific, colossal, completely unbelievable, the master doer, and the Paul Bunyan of the age, embodied the spirit of American wartime industrial ambition. His methods, driven by imagination, organization, and perspiration, were revolutionary. The battles of Coral Sea and Midway had irrevocably proven the aircraft carrier's primacy in naval warfare. The U.S. Air, won wars. Navy, transforming into a seven-ocean navy by 1939, now needed carriers more than ever. While 5 major shipbuilding firms were producing battleships, cruisers, and larger carriers, there was an urgent demand for smaller, faster-to-build escort carriers. By early 1943, Kaiser had reduced ship labor hours by nearly half, from 640,000 in March 1941 to 352,000. He proposed switching all 12 Vancouver shipyard ways to aircraft carriers by March 1943. His proposed escort carrier design, 490 feet long, displacing 6,890 tons with a reciprocating steam engine, offered a rapid solution. However, the Navy's top brass unanimously rejected his proposal, 16-0. They cited the design as too flimsy, argued sufficient orders were already in place, and critically sought to avoid associating their vital war effort with Kaiser's showboat persona, fearing he would overshadow the ships themselves. It was Mordecai Ezekiel who facilitated a meeting between Kaiser and President Roosevelt. Roosevelt, highly impressed, directly intervened, overruling the Navy's objections. Contracts were signed, with the Maritime Commission supervising construction to mitigate Navy risk. These first Kaiser-built escort carriers would be dubbed baby flat-tops. The Kaiser yards attracted over 100,000 workers to Portland, Oregon, from regions like Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, including thousands of African Americans. Patricia Kane Kohler, working as an electrician's helper and then on fire control, experienced firsthand the dangers of shipyard work, from near falls to broken bones. The first of Kaiser's carriers was delivered in July 1943, later than Kaiser's predicted February 1943 for the first four. The USS Alizon Bay, the first baby flat-top, was christened by Eleanor Roosevelt on April 5, 1943. The integrated healthcare package, Kaiser Permanente, took its name from Kaiser's mining company, established to provide for workers in communities like Vanport City. In April alone, 17 Liberty ships were completed, averaging more than 4 per week. However, Kaiser's reputation would face a severe test with the mystery cracks affecting Liberty ships. On January 16, 1943, the Schenectady, an oil tanker from Kaiser's Swan Island Yard, cracked. The Henry Wynkoop, a Liberty ship, split apart on February 12, 1943, in New York Harbor. The SO Manhattan, an oil tanker, broke in two, leaving New York Harbor on March 29, 1943. These incidents created public and congressional doubt about Kaiser's shipbuilding methods and led to calls for investigation. The American Bureau of Shipping initially identified an accumulation of an abnormal amount of internal stress locked into the structure by the processes used in construction, including defective welding. Corrective actions were mandated: cancellation of automatic welding on main strength points, installation of crack arresters, and design changes. Later investigations revealed the underlying problem was embrittlement of the steel itself, making it vulnerable to cracking in low-temperature, high-load conditions. While these failures were serious, the John P. Gaines sank in December 1942, and the John W. de Barque Straub broke apart in Arctic waters in 1944. Out of 2,744 Liberty ships made, only 8 were lost to these issues, and only 2, neither built in Kaiser yards, were lost to cracking with no loss of life. The controversy, though, ultimately resolved, served as a stark reminder of the pressures and potential pitfalls of rapid wartime industrialization. By 1942, annual American airplane production reached 47,873. Kaiser, eager to replicate his shipbuilding success in aviation, partnered with the eccentric Howard Hughes. Hughes's Spruce Goose, or Hercules, was an ambitious design: 8 Pratt & Whitney R4364,000 horsepower engines, a 320-foot wingspan, intended to carry 100 tons of cargo or 750 men over transoceanic distances at 20,000 feet. The Defense Plant Corporation awarded Kaiser and Hughes an $18 million contract for 3 cargo planes. However, the fundamental aeronautical principle of the square-cube law, where lift increases with the square of dimensions but weight increases with the cube, doomed the project. Hughes, his perfectionism and inaccessibility contributed to severe delays. The Kaiser-Hughes contract was cancelled on February 11, 1944, a significant financial and reputational blow to Kaiser's aviation ambitions. Meanwhile, other aviation firms faced severe production issues. Brewster Aviation, for instance, produced only 8 planes in February 1943, none of them the desired Vought F-4U Corsair. The company was plagued by poor material control and severe management-labor disputes, epitomized by union leader Tom DiLorenzo. Kaiser's involvement in aviation despite these setbacks, signaled his broad industrial ambitions and his willingness to tackle monumental new challenges, even if they didn't always pan out. As 1944 began, 70% of America's manufacturing was focused on wartime production. An American factory was building a plane every 5 minutes, producing 150 tons of steel every minute. Shipyards were launching 8 aircraft carriers a month and 50 merchant ships a day. 142 million carloads for military and Allied aid represented the most massive cargo lift in human history. Almost $1 billion in monthly aid to allies, equivalent to $50 billion today, was flowing across the globe. Brewster Aviation's crisis represented a critical bottleneck. In February 1943, the company's output was abysmal, and an unacceptable interruption of production threatened vital aircraft deliveries. On November 7, 1943, Henry J. Kaiser intervened. His approach was revolutionary. Instead of punishment, he focused on morale. He famously sang, "Oh, what a beautiful morning" to workers, advocating for a positive, cooperative environment. Under his influence, Brewster's production ramped up dramatically, from 60 planes in January 1944 to 74 in February, 101 in March, and 1240 in April. This demonstrated a model for resolving production bottlenecks, highlighting the importance of morale and inspired leadership. The persistent threat of Axis air power, initially amplified by Charles Lindbergh's intelligence gathering in 1939, had spurred the development of advanced bomber technology. Lindbergh's late-night call to General Arnold on April 14, 1939, planted the initial seed for a next-generation long-range bomber. A formal recommendation for a 4-engine bomber followed in June 1939, culminating in the Army's formal request for a larger 4-engined bomber on January 29, 1940. Much of the B-29 Superfortress design had already been conceived by Boeing's visionary engineers, Claire Echtvedt and Ed Wells. The B-29 represented a monumental leap in engineering ambition. Its design included pneumatically driven bomb bay doors that snapped open and shut in less than 4 seconds, reducing vulnerability. It featured a 3-bubble pressurized cabin system, enhancing safety and crew survivability at high altitudes. A remote fire control system developed by General Electric provided an early automated weapons system for aiming and firing machine guns. Fowler flaps increased wing area by 20%, improving lift, range, and load capacity. This complex technical leap necessitated groundbreaking engineering solutions and inter-company collaboration. William S. Knudsen, head of Army War Production, maintained his pragmatic focus on overcoming production challenges. On August 17, 1943, during a trip to New Guinea, General George Kenney advocated for continued P-38 production. Knudsen's direct and decisive response, "George, I gather you like P-38s. Okay, we'll build them for you," showcased his ability to prioritize battlefield needs and cut through bureaucracy. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning to Loch, with its twin Allison turbocharged engines, delivering 1,600 pounds of thrust, a speed of up to 414 miles per hour, an armament of 4.50 caliber guns and a 20 mm cannon, was ideal for Pacific long-range fighter operations, outclassing the Japanese Zero's standard, lighter construction. By February 1944, as Marines stormed Kwajalein and American bombers hit the Marianas, the shift in war momentum was clear. America's industrial capacity had become the arsenal of democracy, overwhelming enemy production and resource limitations. The war spurred advancements in aviation technology, most notably the B-29, which would reshape the future of warfare. It revealed the adaptability and resilience of the American free market system, and the immense logistical undertaking of supplying the war effort set new precedents for global supply chain management. While early warnings, like Lindbergh's, were not always perfectly accurate, their impact in driving decisive action was undeniable. The B-29 Superfortress, conceived in the shadow of the breathtaking revolution in 1941, its advanced flaps, a standard feature for modern jet propulsion planes, and a heavy aluminum beam. The spar cord enabled an unprecedented high wing loading of 69 pounds per square foot. Such a design pushed the boundaries of 1941 engineering, initially prompting Air Corps engineers to explode. Impossible, Despite this skepticism, a provisional order for 250 B-29s was placed on May 17, 1941, backed by significant financial investment. The sheer size and intricate nature of the B-29, with 40,540 parts and 1,000,000 rivets, necessitated an unprecedented mobilization of industrial resources. Oliver West, a Boeing production engineer, developed the revolutionary multi-lining assembly method, a radical departure from traditional assembly lines to manage its gargantuan size and complexity. On September 21, 1942, Boeing's test pilot, Eddie Allen, achieved the first successful, albeit brief, flight of the XB-29 prototype, 41002. This proved the concept was viable, igniting the race for mass production. By this time, 1664 superfortresses were on the order book, involving over 1,400 subcontractors. The Wichita plant, designed for B-29 production, employed 26,000 people and led to the construction of 6,000 new homes. The Belle Marietta plant, intended to employ 40,000 workers in a county of just 35,000, faced immense challenges. Helen Dorch Longstreet, an 80-year-old widow, became a dedicated and proficient riveter at Belle Marietta, symbolizing the diverse workforce drawn into the war effort. However, the B-29 project was plagued by near-catastrophic setbacks. Persistent, severe issues with the Wright Cyclone R3350 engines designed for 2,000 horsepower included chronic overheating in the 18 cylinders and exhaust system. These problems led to numerous engineering changes, over 900 by September 1942, and forced hundreds of hours of engine tests. Tragically, on January 18, 1943, the XB-29 prototype crashed catastrophically, killing Eddie Allen and his crew. Initial reports disguised it as a 4-engine bomber to maintain secrecy, with locals assuming it was a B-17. The investigation revealed the cause was not solely an engine problem, but the ignition of instrument tubing in the leading edge of the wing, from the exhaust system, which then ignited the petrol tank. This crash represented a critical nadir, leading to serious consideration of cancelling the program. Other critical system flaws emerged. A production aircraft was found to have aileron control reversal, where flaps and ailerons operated in reverse. General Hap Arnold, head of the Army Air Forces, fiercely championed the B-29. He declared it a War Department special project, placing it under his direct control and cutting through red tape to streamline production and problem-solving. On April 15, 1943, the first B-29 rolled off the assembly line at Wichita, but production remained mired in difficulties. In late autumn 1943, Big Bill Knudsen began his direct intervention, dubbed the Battle of Kansas. He found rows of B-29s on the airfield. None of them had engines. Managers were counting incomplete aircraft to meet quotas. The Belle Marietta plant, by June 1942, was only 3% complete despite a September 1942 production promise, and worker morale was low, leading to walkouts. Knudsen famously described the B-29 as having more bugs than the entomology department at the Smithsonian Museum. This period of intense effort, involving hundreds of specialists working in harsh conditions, finally began to overcome the production hurdles. The multi-lining assembly method pioneered a new paradigm for large aircraft. The B-29 project forged a novel collaboration between the Army Air Forces and private industry, establishing a working relationship that transcended the war. It transformed local economies, making Wichita and Marietta major industrial centers. Once operational, the B-29, with its 99-foot length, 58 tons fully loaded, and 141-foot wingspan, cruising at 357 miles per hour, with a ceiling of 31,000 feet and a range of 5,330 miles, represented a significant strategic asset. It became a symbol of America's unparalleled ability to mobilize its industrial capacity for complex, large-scale technological projects during wartime. The B-29 was not an immediate, seamless triumph, but a hard-won victory over engineering challenges and logistical nightmares. The production of the B-29 Superfortress continued to be a monumental undertaking, pushing the limits of American industrial capacity. At its heart was the Wright Cyclone R3000 horsepower. However, it was plagued by chronic overheating problems in its 18 cylinders and exhaust system. These issues, exacerbated by an inexperienced workforce and inadequate tooling, created a persistent bottleneck in production. The tragic loss of test pilot Eddie Allen and his crew, due to these engine-related failures, underscored the inherent dangers. The initial strategic failures of the B-29 in the Pacific Theater, stemming from both mechanical unreliability and ineffective bombing tactics, demanded a drastic shift in operational doctrine. Colonel Jake Harmon, commander of the 1st Operational B-29 Squadron, experienced firsthand the plane's extreme operational challenges in the Pacific's intense heat. The B-29's pressurized cabins were meant to protect crews at high altitudes, but the DuPont plexiglass observation blisters had a dangerous tendency to blow out under extreme pressure changes. In one vivid account, a gunner was ejected mid-flight. The Bendix dorsal and belly turrets, critical defensive features, were often rendered useless by electrical system short circuits. The Battle of Kansas, Knudsen's intense intervention at the Wichita plant, had begun to overcome some of these production hurdles in late autumn 1943. He grappled with managers like Hartson and Willey at the Martin Omaha plant, confronting the immense difficulties in mass-producing such a complex aircraft. However, the R-3350 engine's reliability remained a concern. The very event of Pearl Harbor had paradoxically accelerated the engine's development and production, transforming it from a theoretical design to a wartime necessity, but without fully resolving its inherent flaws. General Leslie Groves, commander of the Manhattan Project, recognized the B-29 as the crucial delivery system for the atomic bomb. He placed immense pressure on General Hap Arnold, head of the Army Air Forces, to ensure its successful deployment. This convergence of the B-29 program with the Manhattan Project foreshadowed the emergence of the United States as a superpower capable of wielding unprecedented destructive capabilities. Curtis LeMay, the strategic mastermind who arrived on the scene to lead the B-29's operational deployment, found that initial precision bombing tactics were proving ineffective. His re-evaluation of training and tactics marked a pivotal shift. LeMay implemented a more devastating, albeit controversial strategy, prioritizing rigorous training and ruthless execution. This approach, while militarily effective, would have lasting ethical implications. The B-29 program, for all its struggles and near catastrophes, demonstrated the unparalleled ability of the arsenal of democracy to produce incredibly complex machinery on a mass scale. It pushed the boundaries of industrial coordination, supply chain management, and technological innovation, laying groundwork for future large-scale projects. The B-29's eventual strategic deployment, particularly under LeMay's command, played a significant role in the Pacific War's conclusion. The text subtly debunks the idea of effortless wartime production, revealing instead a triumph born of immense struggle, failure, and relentless problem-solving, a testament to human ingenuity and perseverance. This perseverance was tested from the very start. Even before America officially entered the war, the foundations for its immense industrial machine were being laid. In spring 1941, Martin Aircraft broke ground for its vast Omaha plant, a critical piece in the superfortress puzzle. The Army poured $90 million into new jigs and dies there alone, a stark indication of the scale required. Central to the B-29's promise was the R-3350 engine, an ambitious design on which the Army placed huge hopes in 1942. This engine demanded *9,000 separate machine cutting tools, a testament to its complexity. The human challenge was equally immense. Many of the *3,000 employees at Woodridge had never worked in a factory before. The colossal scale was palpable, yet initially often empty. Late 1943 found Bill Knudsen visiting the 4 million square feet of the Dodge Chicago plant, then the largest manufacturing facility in the world, but largely devoid of full production. This wasn't just about building planes, it was about orchestrating an entire continent. Knudsen, the ultimate master builder, would soon take direct command of the program. In December 1943, the General Wolfe flew to China to prepare airfields for the B-29. Yet, the struggle was compounded by other strategic demands. The British, in summer 1940, had already contacted the US, concerned about Germany's access to magnesium for Luftwaffe parts. By December 1940, David Isham, Knudsen understood magnesium's dire importance directly from Churchill. Dow Chemical, with foresight, built a proactive plant in Freeport, Texas, at its own expense. But Henry Kaiser, driven by a desire to break Dow's monopoly, entered the fray. He pursued Dr. to break Dow's monopoly, Fritz Hansgierg's carbothermic reduction process, securing a $9.20 million loan from Jesse Jones in spring 1941 for his Manteca, California plant. The initial results were catastrophic. August 1941 saw 3 workers killed in a retort furnace fire, followed by 2 more deaths weeks later. The experiment was deemed a failure by March 1942. The *FBI jailing of Hansgierg after Pearl Harbor forced Kaiser to adapt. Yet, out of this perceived failure, an unexpected innovation arose. A mixture of powdered magnesium, distillate, and asphalt, initially developed to clean magnesium dust, was dubbed goop. This goop quickly transformed from a safety measure into a weapon. The Chemical Warfare Service tested it at WWII Proving Ground on a replica Japanese village. Kaiser was soon directed to halt ingot production, focusing solely on 410,000 tons of goop within a year. This potent substance, costing 18.3 cents per pound, was profitable, and packed into 10-pound cylinders with proximity fuses, became the deadly M74 incendiary bomb. Meanwhile, the B-29 program continued its arduous climb. In July 1943-26, Marauder production was phased out to prioritize the B-29. The initial January 1945 deadline for B-29 delivery proved unachievable, a testament to the enormous unforeseen challenges. In November 1943, WWII, the Wichita plant produced a mere 17 planes. By December 1943, Wichita reached 31 planes, Marietta just 3, WWII. January 1944 saw Wichita hit 46 superfortresses, and by March 1944, too, produced 51 superfortresses. Hap Arnold's hard deadline of April 15, 1944, prepare for the first B-29 batch in the air loomed, but on that very day only *32 of 200 B-29s had arrived in the theatre of war. The tide slowly turned as industrial might accelerated. By May 1944, WWII, Wichita alone hit 65 planes a month, and all 4 B-29 plants were finally producing. September 1944 marked total B-29 production reaching triple digits. Such was the engine output by August 1944 that Chrysler Dodge's production was so high, the Air Force considered a scale back. Knudson's team, with intense effort, delivered *200 B-29s in 5 months. The M74 Goop bombs were directed westward to the Marianas. On April 4, 1944, the first B-29 landed on Indian soil at Chakulia. The strategic islands were essential. The assault on Saipan began on June 15, 1944, with airfield construction starting even amid the brutal battle. The first superfortress arrived at Saipan's Islay Field on October 12, 1944. Beset, the stage was set for a new kind of air war. On January 19, 1945, Curtis LeMay arrived at Guam to take command. His initial strategies mirrored those of the past. In February 1945, LeMay launched 21st Bomber Command into 16 sorties against Japan, dropping *5,000 tons of ordnance with dismal results. *29 B-29s were lost to enemy fire and *21 to mechanical failure. LeMay recognized a radical change was needed. In March 1945, he devised his new, devastating bombing strategy. This meant a dramatic shift to low-altitude attacks, from a previous 20,000 feet down to 5,000 to 8,000 feet. Night raids were flown singly, using radar scopes, not daylight precision. B-29s flew mostly unarmed, save for their rear turrets. Gun turrets were ripped out, the co-pilot and bombardier removed, all to make room for more M74s. LeMay's objective was chillingly clear: to burn out the heart and soul of an entire nation. His calculation for Tokyo, *25 tons of incendiaries per square mile. The first low-level raid on March 9, 1945, over Tokyo, had terror. It was as though Tokyo had dropped through the floor of the world and into the mouth of hell. *16 square miles burned out Dot-toft, over 250,000 buildings destroyed. Asterisk 83,000 people died in the Tokyo raid. Crews smelled roasting human flesh below, a stench that lingered in their planes. It was the single most destructive air raid in history.